Kia ora koutou, everyone. It's really lovely to be here. I'm a great fan of these hui. These are an opportunity for us to come together. We've already had two amazing keynotes. And this session is going to be a little bit different, because when we do feedback on the hui, we know that you take away so much from it. But you always really give the feedback about the value of this event as a way to connect and engage. And I think it always comes up as a, what would you like more of? We'd like more opportunity to engage and connect. And so we're going to deliver in the next 45 minutes on that. I'm just going to be up here, well, I can be up here the whole time if you want, but really it's about 10 minutes at the start to get us started, and then you're actually going to spend your time with others on your table. There is an option, if you don't like those on your table, you can move, just do it subtly. Or if you just are sitting next to the people that you sit with in the office, you might also want to move a little bit later as well, but I'll explain a bit more. Because the second objective I've been given for this session is to get us excited and inspired about International Year of the Volunteer and start our sort of co-creation, co-design for 2026. And you can see here on the slide, that's what that's about. But it's not only the International Year of the Volunteer, it's also 25 years of Aotearoa Volunteering New Zealand next year. So we're going to be celebrating big style next year, and this is your opportunity to feed into that mahi and really help shape that activity. So I'm going to take you a little bit back so that we can go forward. And the going back is the first International Year of the Volunteer in 2001. I'm going to take you on this little windy journey for the first sort of 10 minutes through 2001, 11, and bring us up to date to almost 26. And we're going to start by going back. And if you go on the Volunteering New Zealand website, there's a really nice kind of timeline of some of the things that Volunteering New Zealand has done and achieved over its now 24, almost 25 years. And so I use that as a bit of an inspiration for a couple of these slides, because if we go back to the 1990s, what we found was that people involved in volunteer centres, I think there was 5 volunteer centres maybe at the time, were beginning to start. 6. I'm going to talk about Cheryl in a moment, but she's already corrected me. 6 volunteer centres in the 1990s began discussing the value of coming together with a national body for volunteering. Importantly, not a kind of a national office, but a separate body that could work alongside the volunteer centres and the work they were doing in their communities. Fast forward into September 2000. It feels a little bit late, the planning this, but anyway, it was September 2000, and there was an establishment of the New Zealand Ministerial Reference Group for the International Year of Volunteering was established. And as part of that reference group, there was advocated for and creation of the funding of Volunteering New Zealand. And that was good, because in 2001, it was both the International Year of the Volunteer, but also that part of what we did here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, was establish Volunteering New Zealand. So on your mix and mingle and match card, I hope you've been filling it in. I only have one gap so far, but that's the reason why it says, what were you doing in 2001? Because we're taking ourselves back those almost 25 years to think. Some of you will not have been born. That's a scary thought for some others of us. But some of you are already impacting. So actually the only line I filled in so far, because I was prepping in here, was actually Cheryl, who was on that ministerial reference group. So I'd just like to give a big shout out to Cheryl and the mahi you've done over all of this period. So if you do move tables, or you've not met the people next to you before, that what were you doing in 2001 is a really good prompt. I was actually still in the UK. I'd never been to New Zealand at that point. I migrated over here 2 years later and things. But I was at the time I was doing my first lecturing job at the University of Greenwich in London. So I feel I've come a very long way since then. So let's keep on our little journey, because sometimes we forget this stop in the journey, which is 2011. So in 2011, and if you don't know about the International Year of the Volunteer, I should maybe mention it's a United Nations initiative, so it's a global initiative. And 10 years later, they did a 10th anniversary. So it wasn't an International Year of the Volunteer, but it was like an International Year of the Volunteer plus 10. Something else was an International Year that year. But what it did is it brought some kind of there was lots of revisiting, particularly internationally, about what had been achieved in that sort of decade since. Here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we saw a lot of volunteering activity happening in 2011, in addition to everything that goes on. One of those was the Rugby World Cup. I remember I was doing some research around the volunteer programme and the experience of volunteers in that Rugby World Cup. But we also saw that huge groundswell of volunteering following the Christchurch and Canterbury earthquakes in late 2010 and early 2011 and onwards. And we saw really not just the landscape physically change, but I think the volunteering landscape change. It brought volunteering to the fore with things like the Student Volunteer Army, and actually put the public consciousness about the importance of communities coming together to both celebrate but also in times of adversity as well. I'll just do a quick shout out for 2012 is on there as well, because actually that was the year that we launched the best practice guidelines for volunteering involving organisations. I think that's when I joined the Volunteering New Zealand board as well, actually. But that was a really important piece of work that actually has its legacy today, and the next session will be all about that. So I just wanted to take you back. These are grounded in that work that came out of this period as well. Okay, we're moving along. We're moving towards 2026, and a number of things happened, and not least that that Volunteering New Zealand launched the new Volunteer Best Practice Guidelines in 2023, and you'll be hearing more about those soon. But where with the red dot at the moment, what comes next is 26, and that International Year of the Volunteering. And what we want to do to sort of both celebrate and mark Volunteering New Zealand turning 25. So, let's talk about what we're going to do today. One of the things that we've seen in the sector, and then we touched on in the keynotes, talked a little bit about this, I think, this morning as well, is the importance of data and insights for informing the work that we do. That gives us ability to inform the practices we do in our own organisations, in our own work, but there's also a sector level importance to insights and data as well, that actually enable us to talk with confidence about what's happening in our sector and the impact that our sector is having. There's a bit of a gap there though. It's actually really hard, and as a researcher who specialises in researching volunteering, it's really hard. There's lots of gaps. There's actually not as many people doing research on volunteering as there should be. But that's where Volunteering New Zealand sort of stepped into the breach about 10 years ago and provided real leadership in providing insights into volunteering, grounded in our place in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So over that period, there's been a series of reports, developed over time as well, as you can see visually. But the first research we did, and this was going out, and initially it was going out, I think, about surveying organisations, and it's been expanded over time to include volunteer voices as well. But there's been a series of reports on the state of volunteering in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And if you've not engaged in this research, I've certainly sort of shared some of it at previous conferences with our quizzes that we've done. But it's really, really valuable research that will give you insights into what's happening here in our sector. And particularly, I'd like to pull out the work that was done following the 2022 report, where there was a deep dive in the analysis, not to just look at a national level, but to look both at a regional report, but also looking at the contributions of Te Ao Māori and looking and diving into that area as well. These are all on the Volunteering New Zealand website if you'd like to have a look. But what we decided we'd focus today's session on is picking out some of the things that we've learned from 10 years of research and get you to have a think about what that means. So here are, I think there's 9, if I've corrected right, yeah, 9 trends that we found, things we found over a decade of state of volunteering research. And I'll just very briefly give you insight. You'll have an opportunity to look into these in a bit more detail. We've seen that volunteering is increasingly seen as a high-skilled activity. So not just a contribution of time, but also a contribution of skills. We heard from Paul already this morning about super diversity, and this really, I think, feeds into that we've seen volunteering habits and expectations are changing. And that's in a huge number of different ways, but an overall theme is that change. We've seen that sector-level research and publications, like the state of volunteering, are becoming increasingly important in shaping policy and practice. In some cases because they're having to fill a gap which we're not getting from, for example, Stats New Zealand and what we know about volunteering there. We've also seen strengthening of partnerships with Tangata Whenua in relation to mahi aroha. We're going to use, in the reports we tended to use mahi aroha. There are a range of different ways of recognising volunteer, not just in Te Ao Māori, but also in other cultures as well. But generally we've sort of landed at the moment on mahi aroha, certainly in the research reports. And we've looked at kind of, we've seen the contribution of mahi aroha to well-being, societal impact, and the broader ecosystem starting to be increasingly recognised. We've seen increasing volunteering increasingly supported in the workplace, and Andrew and I are both at Te Waka Victoria University of Wellington, so thanks for shouting out the volunteer programme, and I'll now shout out my other bit, which is volunteer Wellington. Where's Anne, who's our employee volunteer coordinator, so anyone who's Wellington based, Anne's the person to see if you've got some volunteering hours you want to use. But we've seen that as a trend across organisations, whether or not that be a volunteering day, whether or not be recognising other forms of support for volunteering activities of staff. We've seen changes in policy and regulations affecting how volunteering is structured. Some of those have provided opportunities, some of those have perhaps provided some more constraints on the sector. We've seen that recognition of mahi aroha and the need for rangatuhe and research into Te Ao Māori. So what actually does this mean in different cultures? And actually, I feel I should really have quickly added a 10th one from what Paul was saying this morning, actually about what does volunteering mean in many cultures. And then finally, we've seen a noticeable gap through the research in how volunteers on the ground are experiencing their roles and how managers or senior leaders in the sectors perceive volunteering. So when we started bringing the volunteer voice into the conversation, we saw some disconnect. And I've see some nods around the room. You probably can think of some of those ways. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a bit of an interactive activity where you get to spend some time chatting to people on your table. But we're going to do it in a way that captures your ideas so that we can feed these ideas into that co-design and co-creation of how we celebrate International Year of the Volunteer. The data that you're going to provide, and I'll explain how you're going to provide it in a moment, will be captured, and I'll provide that to Volunteering New Zealand. But I'm also going to test myself with AI, Andrew, and I'm going to try and do a quick dive into a top-level analysis of the data you provide now and report it back to you at the end of the day with Michelle. So we'll see where that goes. That's my aim. So we're going to take those 9 trends from what we've learned about a decade of state of volunteering research. And we're going to look at some of the greatest opportunities and the greatest challenges that presents. So on your table, you have an envelope, and somebody gets the joy of opening your envelope. It doesn't matter which of the 2 envelopes you've got. I feel it's like the awards ceremony bit now. But inside your envelope, you will find lots of coloured cards. So let me explain what we're going to do. For each of those 9 trends, there is a coloured card in your pack. You haven't got all of them. They're split between the tables. There's 2 different packs. They're all in there. So if you're looking for one that's not on that you saw on the screen and you really wanted to do, give me a wave and I can probably find a spare copy for you. But you've got about half of the trends in your pack. And there's a card for each trend, and each trend is different. And what we'd like you to do is in small groups. So I don't think you should try and do this as a whole table, because The tables are quite nice, it's quite snug, but it's, you've half an hour. You'll be shouting across the table. I suggest you break into 2 or 3 little groups and do this with a neighbour, with a couple of neighbours. And take one of the trends, it does not matter which one you choose, and think about these 2 questions. What opportunity does this present? And what challenges does this present? Now, some of you will be going, yeah, I love that. It's a really nice open-ended question. And some of you will be going, well, I don't know where to start. So if you're somebody who leads a little bit more of a prompt, flick your card over, because every card has a more specific question if you need it. So you don't have to do everything. You can just do the open-ended, what the opportunities and challenges. But if you like something a bit more, we've delved into what we know from the state of volunteering, and we've given you a more precise question to engage with. I also have a backup plan, and I've got a couple of sort of willing volunteers who, if you need a human prompt to help you, Cheryl and Michelle are both available, as I am, to come round. So if you're really stuck or you don't know where to go, give us a wave and we'll come to you and we can be a human prompt. So we don't just need technology. But in saying that, well, there's my discussion prompt. In saying that, we are going to use technology in this session. So let me just explain what I'm going to ask you to do. Now, you're all discussing already. Just hold your horses. Hold your horses. I'm going to explain because I want you to chat, but I want you to capture. So every card has a different QR code on it, okay? And if you scan that QR code with your phone, or there's also a little bit.ly link there as well, you can just put in your URL. You can do it on a phone. If you've got your laptop, you can do it on a laptop. And if I've set this up correctly, and this is my most nervous bit when I find you all going to the same, it should take you to 9 different surveys. And each of those surveys are about one of the questions. And it basically has a space for you to actually say what we've just said there. It'll give you the trend, and it'll ask you about what opportunities, and it'll ask you about the challenges. It'll also ask you if you need a discussion prompt, and if you say no thanks, you just move on. And if you say yes, a new question, the more detailed question will pop up. Okay? And I'd like you to have one of the people on your table, or one of the people in the group that you're talking with, is just to capture some of the ideas that you're talking with. It's the corridor which is most important, but we would like to try and capture some of that data as well. And when you finish, just click submit. Now you can choose one question and you can spend the rest of the session discussing that question. Absolutely fine. But if you'd like a bit of variety, when you've finished and clicked submit, choose a different card and start again. Scan a new QR code because it will take you to a new online session with a different question. Everyone also has a bonus topic. And the bonus topic that everyone has is about celebrating International Year of the Volunteer. So Volunteering New Zealand are currently doing lots of work and some of you will have been involved in some of that corridor about what it means to be celebrating International Year of the Volunteer 2026. But if you've got some ideas that you'd like to share, I've also got that one. I'll leave this one open, so if you don't get to it during the session, it'll be there for the rest of the day, and we'll share that back with Volunteering New Zealand about what you'd like to see happening to celebrate the International Year of the Volunteer, and any other feedback that they can take on board as they put their planning for the year together. Does all of that make sense? It says I've got one more slide, do I? Oh, I do. I'm going to leave you now and just going to wander around and help out where needed, because actually the rest of the session is you, and then I'm going to take the data that you provide, so don't put any sensitive information in there, you don't need any personal, it doesn't ask for your name. I'm going to take that data during one of the workshop periods. I'm going to sneak out, I'm going to do a little bit of initial analysis of that. Michelle and I will be back right at the end of the conference, all going well, to share some of the things that you've told us. Now, when I ask a room full of students, do we have any questions? Everyone then looks down. Have we got any questions or clarifications? Go for it. Kira, that was a great session. I only managed to catch the end of it because I've learned if you promise to provide some feedback by the end of the conference, you end up missing some really great sessions as you're trying to get the Wi-Fi to download the data and you're crunching it. So looking forward to the recording. Kira, welcome back. When I came to talk to you before earlier, have we got that on? Excellent, thank you. I promised you some emerging themes, and I've got to partly deliver on my promise there, because I kind of thought I'd sort of lean into what Andrew sort of talked to us about this morning, kind of the potential of AI to support us in our work. As we were doing that session, Bev and I, so Bev's from community research, and I was sort of doing a bit of reflection after Andrew's presentation about kind of, oh my goodness, what's the added value of a researcher in this space? If I can do all of this in the next couple of hours, what does it look like? And I'm pleased to say I am not yet out of a job. And I think there's some real value add from the human, but I'm also going to hopefully show you how we can use AI. I just used Microsoft Copilot for this. It was through actually my own works subscription, but I haven't, it's nothing special. I haven't put the prompts on here, but if anyone wants them, I basically sort of told it about who we were, what we were doing, what we had done, and I shared the data in an Excel file with it, and then gave it some prompts about what to look for. So, remember we talked about 9 different things. Thank you all for sharing your ideas through the survey. Most of the questions had about 9 or 10 different groups respond, so there's a little bit of data there. If we had lots more data, it would pull out some more, I think, more things as well. But one of the things I really just asked it to do was to, what are some of the opportunities we've identified? And if you've not played around much with AI, or if you have played around with AI, you'll know it can do things like kind of create your slides. So this is its slide. I really don't like it because the text is so small, it's ridiculous. So I put it a bit bigger. And this was what it said from the data that you gave us around opportunities from those 9 different themes. Around innovation technology, market expansion, and sustainability initiatives. And I think there's some all right things in there, but I don't think they really speak to us as a sector. So I actually went and asked it to kind of remember who I told them was in the room. And I asked it, I was a bit more polite than that, and I asked it to reshape those opportunities for a community and voluntary sector and a policymaker audience. And so how they've reshaped this into community-led innovation and digital inclusion, by empowering communities to use accessible tools and technology to meet local needs and connect diverse groups. I think that is quite a nice opportunity, kind of pulling together across those 9 different themes, trends we identified. Market expansion. I mean, I work in a business school and I found that a bit jarring, but essentially expanding participation and inclusion, engaging new groups, including rangatahi, migrants, and tangata whenua through flexible, culturally responsive roles. And then the third one, sustainability initiatives. And I don't think I did a quick word search. Sustainability as a word didn't really come up that often. But reframing that as strengthening social impact and well-being, recognising Mariaha as essential to well-being, social cohesion, and resilient communities. I think that's a really good start. And if this was data I was diving into more, and I might well do, I'd be quite excited about what it was telling me about opportunities, and I'd want to know more about what was in the data that would actually sort of flesh those out. That's the good stuff. The next thing I did was ask it to do the same for challenges. Oh, did you want to say anything? Because I'm not going to talk about challenges. Do you want to say anything about in response to those themes, Michelle?
Not particularly. It's a pretty good summary, I think, of core challenges. But I don't want to speak over the synthesizing of the content, but it'll be interesting perhaps afterwards to look into it in more detail. And
I think so. I think there's some really nice things that we could follow in. I asked to do the same for challenges, and it was rubbish. Now, if I had more time, I would go back and I would actually prompt it differently. But when I asked it for challenges, if you can read those, they mean nothing. There's nothing related to the data at all. It's about, what is it? I can't see on the screen in front of me, so I'm just going to turn around. Challenges have been identified, they impact on objectives, and we need solutions. So this is a good example of AI needing a little bit of a sense check and help. where it was better is I then just picked out one, and I chose the last one because when I read that one out, there was lots of nods. That was the one around a noticeable gap between volunteers on the ground experiences, their roles, and how managers or senior leaders in the sector perceive volunteering. And I think it really struck me as well, Michelle, when you were talking about the best practice guidelines, how they've moved from organisational to a much more volunteer experience focus. And I think this really nicely sort of sums up those different perspectives. And I think it did a reasonable job here. So it gave me some opportunities around co-creation and consultation, volunteer-led models, improved recognition and support for managers, and policy alignment with lived experience. I say it did a good job. This is your data. You shared this a few hours ago, and that's what it's pulling on. Challenges, some misunderstanding of those volunteer needs, friction from mismatched experiences, geographical and demographic shifts, so we were obviously listening first thing this morning to Paul, and also lack of leadership engagement with frontline realities, which I thought was an interesting one. I think there's a lot more you could dig into it, and it actually did give me more, but I've pulled out the top thing. But I then went back to it and said,